The next presentation, we still have another couple of minutes. If you want to set up. Yeah, all right. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have Ruth, Cardinal, and Grant Larson from Larson and McGowin. Ruth has served as a forest analyst for the past 25 years, specializing in timber supply analysis, price forecasting, and timber valuation. Grant Larson is a graduate of Mississippi State University. He's a Mississippi registered forester, and he's serving as a GIS manager for Larson and McGowin. With that, I'm gonna leave.
Okay, all right, good morning. It's good to be here, and thank you for this conference. It's very nice to be in person, isn't it? So I'm Ruth Sewell, Ruth Cardinal Sewell, with Larson McGowin. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Larson McGowin. We're a full service consulting firm. We're based out of Mobile, but we have offices all over the Southeast, and we manage for a variety of clients. Thank you, Elizabeth, for a shout out from Forestry Group yesterday. That's one of our clients. We do a lot of consulting projects as well. We do a lot of large scale inventory work. So Tree Swift, love hearing about the robots and the drones because we need some help in our inventory world for sure. We do analytical services, and you heard from Kurt and Rachel, our out of our Silvic solution. It's our subsidiary. We also have a brokerage firm called Larson McGowin Properties. But today I'm going to talk to you. I know that was a great teasing title, wasn't it? Wood everywhere, but where's the demand? I've heard some interesting feedback like, what the heck are you talking about? So as I mentioned, I do a lot of supply and demand analysis. And so we've been kind of trying to answer some of the questions our clients have been asking us, specifically about where is the demand because of all the wood that we've got out there. So I thought Grant Larson is our GIS manager and I'm our analyst. And so we worked in combo on an approach to look at how we could incorporate some of the GIS and analytical skills that we've got, as well as also some of the data that we're getting in our information systems that Kurt spoke about earlier to answer some of those questions. But before we get started, I kind of wanted to look across the landscape of, I know we've had history lessons yesterday. I'm going to call this current events, my next slide. I'm pulling headlines out from the last couple of years that kind of tell a story. How many of you have seen this headline? It's not quite one we like to see on the Wall Street Journal, is it? Thousands of Southerners planted trees for retirement. It didn't work. Well, we might take exception with some of the conclusions in that article, but the truth is we do have a lot of trees out there. From 1980 to 2020, we have quadrupled the pine supply in the Southeast. And not only that, the pine saw timber in 2008, we had 14 years of about annual removals. Now we have about 26 years. That's a lot of trees that we've got to cut through if we want to keep our supply and demand in balance. But supply and demand is local. It's all about your localized wood basin. So this is a snapshot that they're really looking at across the Southeast. Here's another headline that's been out there. Canadian producers settled into Southern pine. They're here. They started coming in 2000. West Fraser arrived trying to diversify. Camphor, 2005, escaping tariffs and looking at the rising housing demands at that point in time. Of course, the mountain pine beetle didn't help. Then Interfor in 2013, I guess our Southern hospitality was really starting to pay off at this point in time. But it's really kind of remarkable that if you look, 3 of the 5 largest pine sawmill companies now have their offices in Vancouver. So that's different. We've got a different landscape. With that movement, we have consolidation. How many people have been hearing? I think I had a talk yesterday at the lunch about consolidation, that Yes, it's been helpful by the Canadians, but between 2012 and 2018, we've had about 40 of our southern sawmills have changed ownership. And those were a lot of family owner mills that are now in large corporations. Here's another one. How many do you start to see this? Increased automation will improve southern sawmill efficiency. Now, I think this was helped by our Canadians coming south, but it certainly isn't really helping our oversupply, isn't it? Making more wood out of less trees. Now, this is a headline that's very current to everybody right now in almost every industry, but it's really not a new one for us. We've known that this was coming. We've known that the logging industry was facing a worker shortage. And it's not just the logging industry. We're facing shortages in the sawmills, finding millwrights, and in that regard. I heard the quote yesterday, swimming in data. We are now swimming in data. Imagery in particularly, there's so much out there. I think I've heard of numerous presentations are talking about the maze. So this is a new thing on our landscape to help us with supply and demand, is how can we use all this data that's at hand to answer some of our questions? And then the big headline of the last year, the lumber mania sweeping North America. How many are you getting questions from your landowner? It's like, with lumber prices like that, how come my timber prices are not like that? We're having to answer that over and over and over. Well, it comes down to pure economics, does it not? Supply and demand. Like I said, I've been doing supply and demand for, gosh, I hate to say it, about 35 years. It used to be we just popped a radius around a mill site or an area of interest, a land base. We knew the mills, we knew how much they consumed. We even did some fancy, how much from the outside is coming into that radius. We put the FIA inventory underneath it, came up with our supply. Maybe we did something fancy like looking at the search model. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. I run the search model to look at future supply and demand. Maybe we just generated some growth and removal ratios to kind of did it. Well, that is so old school and boring. And it doesn't really answer some of the questions that we're now getting from our clients. And probably the one question that we wanted to tackle today and that we've been working on is, how is this mill consolidation, the entry of the Canadian mills in particularly, I'm going to pick on Interfor in this example, how has that affected localized supply and demand? And by that, I mean within wood basins itself. So this is a map of the current Interfor mills and their original owners and graduated by their year of acquisition. Some of them just this year, as y'all know. And you can watch as they start to take over the landscape in this regard. And we're going to kind of, I don't know how to use this, we're going to kind of focus on this area right here later on. But this is what we wanted to understand. How does this mill consolidation and this have an effect on supply and demand? And at that, I'll turn it over to Grant, because I turned it over to him to answer the question spatially.
All right. Ruth had mentioned a little bit earlier the traditional way, she called it old school and boring, of how we would usually utilize a facility, extend beyond with a radial distance from a particular facility to better understand what's within that geographical region, what type of resources, where might we draw some resource into that facility utilizing the radial distance. We're thinking of this as a different approach. Many of y'all are probably familiar. We're going to use a transportation network analysis approach, where we look at a transportation network to extend from a facility outward to see what transportation distances, what barriers might exist within that framework, to better realize where, in this instance, wood may be coming from in order to arrive at a particular facility. Here, I've just simply gone forward with a specific distance from a specific facility, just to see, varying that radial distance, how that might apply. And then when we apply that and take a look at our traditional old school boring methodology there, we see that there are considerable differences We have a decrease in extent with our network analysis, but our network analysis begins to incorporate barriers to transportation. And those can be various things. Those can be the actual road network. They can be bridges. They could be physical features within that landscape. So we're going to utilize this network analysis notion to move forward with our analysis that we're looking at. Earlier, our colleagues had mentioned Load Boss from Silvic Solutions. We're utilizing that in our timber operations through Larson McGowin. And within this context, we've taken thousands of loads where we know the point of origin, meaning the load is coming from the woods. We know the destination, the facility that they're going to, and utilizing those thousands of loads, we get that direct line to this distance, point A to point B. But obviously, from a network perspective, we know where it started, where it ended up. We can then calculate the transportation network distance related to those and utilize that information from thousands of loads to better inform what we would consider to be our reach. In this context, I'm saying network analysis equals a reach for a particular facility. So we've gone at this point from direct line distance, calculate the route distance, and then apply that to individual mills. Ruth had mentioned the particular instance that we'll take a look at in Georgia. In 2009, we have 7 facilities that are controlled by 4 entities in 2009, with our reach applied to that from some informed distances based on consumption and other things. And at this point, we go to 2021, and all these 7 mills between 4 entities are now in one ownership for 2021. So extending this analysis, we now have 2 time periods, 2009, 2021. We expand that concept throughout the Southeast, where we take each of those facilities and apply a reach to those. We compare those reaches amongst one another to see how they compare with their adjoining facilities. And then we apply a little context to there to better visualize and understand what's going on with the applications that we've applied for each of those individual mills. What we're seeing here, I believe, is 2021 across the Southeast, based on those criteria that we discussed a little bit earlier. And I'll pass this back to Ruth.
Cripple up here. And that's exactly what he did. He passed it back to me, the analyst, and he said, okay, I've symbolized this to represent what might be a diminished demand by a mill. We think mills are not going to compete with themselves. So if a mill is within the same wood basin, it's diminished its demand incrementally, and that's been symbolized. And so this is 2009. And if we look forward, we see 2021. It's a little hard to see some changes back there. You will see an increase in demand. We do have increase in demand built into this, but let's zero in on the area we were looking at. So this was that area where the 3 mills that Interfor in this little triangle that I want to point out, that's Rainier, Kendall, and Tollinson, that are now controlled or owned by Interfor. There's some more outside of that as well as Interfor, but you can see when there were multiple owners in that wood basin, there was an increase in demand. That's the darker color. When we get down to where we're assuming that Interfor is not going to compete with itself, it's going to be one mill, it decreases the demand. So that's just one sort of snapshot. How do we look further into this? Well, I looked into a Timbermark South custom price basing for pine saw timber, and they generate a heat map. This is for an 8-quarter period of time centered around 2009 and 2021. And you see some really interesting changes. The darker colors are where the higher priced wood would be in that custom basin. And it's kind of scattered in 2009. It's kind of scattered throughout, kind of representative of where the mills are. But over here, there's definitely a shift of the higher prices are coming to the south. Maybe we're seeing West Fraser having some influence into this market here, but certainly less competition is being reflected in a lower price, supposedly. That's conclusion we're kind of making and representing to our clients. So let's look at the price. So the weighted price there for that custom basin back in that 8-quarter period was $29.91, about $30. For the surrounding Georgia 2 Timber Mark South Basin, which surrounds this custom basin, it was $29. So the custom basin, which has more competition in the sense, was 3% more than its surrounding Georgia 2 basin. If we look at 2020's price, the custom basin was 26. Unfortunately, they're lower than they were way back when. That's sad, isn't it, for us? But we know that's the truth. But the custom basin in this case is $26.78, whereas the surrounding Georgia 2 Timber Mark South Basin is $27.95. So the custom basin this time is 4% less than its surrounding basin. So these are just two data points that we are looking at to help us kind of understand what might be happening in a wood basin, that we can explain to our clients perhaps what the market is doing, where the pricing is going. It helps us in our price forecasting. We're just starting this work. We think there's a lot more data points that we can put under there. Supply obviously is a very obvious one. We'd like to extend this expansion of price data across, and great. And I'll let Grant wrap it up with some of the other ideas that we have.
Yeah, obviously, supply and demand is rather complex, has a plethora of inputs that apply in these scenarios. So not to be content with where we're at now, we're looking forward to how we can further apply GIS capabilities and the vast amount of available data to these types of analysis processes to get finer detail on what our results are. Quickly here, I mentioned earlier barriers to transportation within that transportation network analysis. Obviously bridges, road weights, those types of things come into play and are very important in our localized analysis for particular areas. We're specifically speaking about wood in this instance, but what about the areas that do not have wood, the non-forested areas, and how do those play into the complex nature of supply and demand? In this instance, just quickly depicting areas, ag lands, developed areas, things of that nature that are not our target resource, or maybe more importantly, our primary target. In this instance, pine plantations in the Southeast, all the parameters that would go along with this type of data, if we were to look at the age class distribution, the growing stock density, where those are located in relation to a particular facility or a particular landowner's area throughout the Southeast. Additionally, Ruth had talked about the labor shortage, the lack of harvest contractors or the decreasing number of harvest contractors that are available in our industry. Also, we talk about how temporal this is. We've talked about from 2009 to 2021. It even gets more finite or infinite, we might add, in this context when we think about temporal components like weather. How does precipitation, acute weather activities, ice storms that many of our friends in Louisiana may have encountered, hurricanes that some of our friends in Florida may have encountered, how that's scattered throughout the landscape. I think that they're, again, going back to the plethora of data and how that applies to these situations, there's certainly a lot of opportunity to take that information and better inform some of the questions that we're looking to answer. And with that, Ruth will be glad to answer any question that y'all can come up with. Thank y'all.